Okay.
Recording in progress. Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
All right. Welcome, everybody. I'll apologize to the public that our camera is currently not working. So we're just going to have audio, but we're here in the chamber. This is the Provo Municipal Council work meeting. It is Tuesday, November 29th, and it is 1:37 p.m., November 29th, 2022. Meetings of the Municipal Council are being held in hybrid fashion. Members of the public can view council meetings on YouTube or Facebook, or they may attend in person in the council chamber here in Provo City Hall. I'll remind participants to mute your microphones when not speaking. I am George Handley, Council Chair. I'm joined on the stand by Vice Chair McKay, Councilors Ellsworth, Fillmore, Whipple, and Shipley, and Travis Hoban is joining us online. And also joined on the dais here by Wayne Parker, our Chief Administrative Officer, and Gary Millward, our attorney, and Mayor Kafusi will be joining us shortly. We'll have an opening prayer provided by Don Jarvis.
Push. Okay, got it. Thank you. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for the opportunity we have to gather together. We're grateful for the sacrifices of these people here who work for the good of the citizens of Provo. And we pray thee to bless us so we may remember our blessings we have in this land for the freedom of speech and the freedom to elect our own officials. We're grateful for the health and strength we enjoy after the terrible pandemic. Pray thee to bless all the members here of our community, that they may be wise and do what they can to protect their health and strength. Bless the members of this council as they deliberate, that they may do that which is best for the long-term interests of our city and for thy creation. And these blessings we pray for humbly in Christ's name, amen.
Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. So please wait to speak until called on by the chair. We'll start with approval of minutes. It is proposed that we approve the following minutes. November 1, 2022 council meeting. Are there any objections or requested changes? Seeing none, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. We'll turn to our first item tonight, or this afternoon, presentation from Utah Clean Energy regarding net zero stretch codes. This was an issue that has come up with the Natural Resources Committee and some conversations with Hannah Salzo, our sustainability coordinator. And we thought this would be a good item to present to us in a work session to get educated a little bit about some opportunities that we will want to deliberate about at a later point. But Hannah Salza will present our speaker, presenter, Kevin Emerson from Utah Clean Energy and Director of Building Efficiency and Decarbonization, who's joining us online. Go ahead, Hannah.
Hello. So this came up because Utah Clean Energy has been working with municipalities to put this on their radar, including Provo and other cities in Utah County, which put it on the radar of the Natural Resources Committee. So we've been looking into a little more and just started digging into what the pros and cons might be for Provo, what options we have available. But before we went too much farther, we wanted to loop the rest of the council in on the discussion. So this is a great opportunity to hear from Kevin, who is the state's expert on this, and also to ask him questions. There'll be some time at the end for that. And also for the community or for the committee to kind of get a sense of how the council's feeling about this before we go too much farther. Kevin is, as George said, Chair Handley, the Director of Building Efficiency and Decarbonization with Utah Clean Energy. And what they've been doing is working with municipalities to help empower them to explore different solutions to have more of a say in the sorts of buildings that are built within their communities. The state has already said that cities cannot mandate any policies that would effectively exclude a utility So we cannot require net zero or all electric buildings by state law, but there are other tools in our toolbox, which Kevin will explain a little bit more. What I'll do now is just highlight a few of the community benefits and show how this might dovetail with efforts that Provo is already doing. So we have some Provo context for the solutions that Kevin will bring up. The major benefits are, you're going to hear a lot about how it might save money on utilities by shifting to energy efficient net zero buildings and kind of breaking that down. We understand energy efficient buildings, right? They're using their power in an incredibly efficient way with things like more efficient HVAC systems, building envelopes, air circulation, better use of natural light, so you don't rely as much on electric. These are all pretty industry standard things, and other communities have adopted higher building standards with great success. Daybreak, for example. Net zero is a little bit newer. It essentially means that the building does not have any on-site emissions of various greenhouse gases like methane, carbon dioxide, but also nitrogen dioxide and PM 2.5, which we know are terrible for respiratory health, especially for vulnerable individuals like children. And PM 2.5 is also the main contributor to our air quality here. So in addition to potential financial benefits, there's the air quality benefits and also the public health benefits that come along with that. It kind of is part of one entire holistic solution looking at on-site energy use. Touching on the air quality, that is something that Provo residents have said that they do care a lot about. You remember that Y2 survey we did with the general plan, that random sample statistically valid one? When asked what elements of the environment most impact their life, residents far and away said that it was air quality. When asked what the city needs to do more about, number one, again, air quality. When asked what the city does best on, very last was air quality. So this is an area where residents are noticing areas for the city to be able to step up and do a little bit more. If we're going to do that, I think we really need to be strategic. There are lots of sources of emissions, but buildings specifically in Utah are responsible for about 40 to 75% of a community's emissions. So this is an area where we have a huge ability to act. This is the main player. It's also, thankfully, the area that is generally cheapest to enact policy in. Better than agriculture or transportation, you get more bang for your buck working with building emissions than in any other area. So if this is something Provo wants to do, this is probably the best arena in which to focus our efforts. Kind of getting into that supply and demand of these emissions and of power, it dovetails perfectly with what Provo is already doing. Electrification has a supply and a demand side as we're looking at it. Supply is where we're getting our energy from, how we're making our electricity. And Provo Power, Travis Ball is here, is doing a fantastic job. They're one of the leaders in the area, and Provo already gets 48% of its energy from healthier renewable sources that aren't putting out these harmful emissions, that are not contributing to worse air quality. And they're working on getting up to 60% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. That's great, but it's only half the puzzle if we're not also addressing how we're using that energy on site. And that's where we get to things like these building codes. Provo is already doing a lot in this area, but there's definitely room to improve. Some of our successes, the EPA every year puts out a list of cities that have the highest number of energy efficient certified buildings. Provo for the last couple of years has come in at number 2 in mid-sized cities and number 23 for all cities across the nation, which is great. That's the Provo-Orem metropolitan area, but most of those are in Provo. According to the American Planning Association, that's the highest number of energy certified buildings per capita of any city in the US. And those are just energy efficient. They're not net zero. But this building we're meeting in right now, City Hall, was built to be net zero. There was a lot of talk when this building was decided on that it would be net zero. And that decision was committed to by the council and administration, that this would serve as a standard for future development, that the city could hold this up and say, we're willing to put in the extra effort to make this commitment to public health, to air quality, to quality of life by adopting these higher standards for ourselves. And those voluntary higher standards are what Kevin's going to talk about introducing to the rest of the business community. We've got the framework for the supply. We've set the example for the demand. Now we just need to figure out how we're going to communicate that demand in a way that empowers developers to be able to use tools the city is giving them to become part of the solution, working with Provo City, especially Provo Power, to improve air quality and public health. Thank you. And I'll give the rest of the time to Kevin.
Thank you, Hannah. Go ahead, Kevin. Yeah, I can see you're unmuted.
I unmuted myself. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you, council members, for the opportunity to join you today and share some information. I really appreciate Hannah's introductory remarks and setting the stage, and also highlighting what Provo City has already done and is currently doing. I'm grateful for Provo City's leadership, and am really excited to share some information with you today. My goal today is to share this information that Hannah queued up that I hope will inspire the City Council to consider adopting programs that will support zero emission buildings in Utah. So I wanted us to introduce, well, myself a bit, as well as the organization I work for. Again, my name is Kevin Emerson, and I've worked for this organization, Utah Clean Energy, for about 16 years, working on energy efficiency and building efficiency and utility efficiency policies and programs. We are a 20-year-old independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We're a public interest organization, and we exist with a mission to help transition our state and our businesses and our families and our communities to highly efficient use of energy and energy that comes from clean, renewable sources. We're a solutions-oriented organization. We have policy and regulatory expertise, and as I mentioned, we were founded about 20 years ago. I'm a lifelong Utahn as well, growing up on the Wasatch Front, and it's been amazing to see all the things that have changed over the last 10 to 15 years, and I look forward to working in partnership to make more change happen. So as Hannah queued up, homes and buildings are part of Utah's air quality story and the kind of the issues that we have that we're dealing with in terms of grappling with, you know, the downsides of our modern society today, including energy. By 2024, as Hannah alluded to, the Utah Division of Air Quality estimates that the area sources category of emissions, of local emissions, will become the dominant source. This graph from a couple of years ago, that's based on Division of Air Quality data, just shows how the area sources category, which includes our
Kevin, are you sharing a screen? Because we're not seeing any graph.
I am sharing, but why don't I stop and reshare?
Yeah, it says you started screen share, but still don't see anything.
Oh, darn. Let's see, I have a chat message here. Oh, Let's see, it says that I'm sharing my screen. Okay. Okay.
Is there a solution to that? Unless Kevin quickly emailed it to us. Is that possible? Kevin, if you emailed it to us directly, you could email it to council@provo.org.
Okay.
And then we could.
Okay.
And that way, if we get it in our emails, we can pull it up on our phones or laptops. Some of us have laptops. You do not, but maybe you can.
Okay, I will
I don't know.
Share this real quick. I apologize for the.
No problem. We apologize for the glitch.
Okay.
We also started you a little bit late, but we're not overly compacted in our schedule today, so we'll make sure you get full time.
Okay, that's wonderful. Okay, I'm just opening up my email and getting ready to send it. It was council@provo.org.
Yes.
Okay.
What? Okay, I can send it to you guys.
Sorry, just bear with me for a moment.
Have you sent it?
Provo, I haven't quite sent it. Work. Okay. It's 3 megabytes, so it should hopefully go through pretty easily. Okay, I've just sent it.
Have it yet? Oh, I got it. Okay, I'll forward this to Michael. What? And then to Malia, or who else? Okay, we have it. So
Okay.
Kevin, go ahead, and
Okay.
we may be able to project it here locally, but we at least have it on our computers.
Okay, wonderful. So as I was saying that, really, I just want to express that, buildings are one of the many opportunities we have to improve air quality. Area sources, which includes our homes and buildings, is soon to become the largest single category of emissions in terms of how we categorize different sources of emissions that lead to the air quality challenges that we experience. And when it comes to our homes and buildings, they're not the lion's share. They're a small percentage of the area sources category. But the good news is that we have the know-how and the technology to dramatically reduce, if not eliminate, these emissions from our homes and buildings, especially our new homes and buildings, because as they get built is the right time to put these new ideas into practice. So when we're talking about emissions that that contribute to local air quality challenges from our homes and buildings, we're talking about gas combustion for space heating, water heating, and as well as things like gas cooking, gas fireplaces, and things like that. In addition to our local air quality challenges, buildings represent nationally as well as globally 40% generally of the CO2 emissions in the inventory. And that's about 30% from how our buildings operate and run. And then about 11% that comes from how our buildings are actually constructed, the embodied carbon, which we're not going to get into, but I just wanted to share that distinction. And the embodied carbon comes from extraction and mining and manufacturing the materials that we construct our buildings out of. So I realize that I'm probably using a term that is probably new or unfamiliar, or it's not really an official term, perhaps, when I say zero emission buildings. So I wanted to share this graphic to illustrate how I define a zero emission building. As compared to a standard building, a zero emission building is firstly very highly energy efficient. So there's strategies like lighting and heating and cooling systems and insulation and air sealing that dramatically reduce energy waste in the buildings and make the buildings more comfortable and makes the building more affordable to operate. And second, a zero emission building uses highly efficient electric heating systems for space heating and water heating and cooking and other sources where a standard building may use gas. And third, the building offsets its energy use with either on-site or off-site renewable energy to meet its energy needs. So we're really talking about kind of a blend of net zero buildings, so a building that's efficient and meets all its energy needs with renewable energy, as well as a building that is moving away from combustion to create heat for space heating and water heating and cooking and things like that. So as Hannah alluded to, updating energy codes in Utah is one important way to support improvements in energy efficiency and reducing emissions from new buildings in Utah. But as you likely know, and as Hannah queued up, that new building code adoption in Utah is the responsibility of the Utah legislature. And the result is that local governments aren't allowed to set and adopt the mandatory building codes, including the energy codes, if those were to exceed the minimum codes adopted at the state level. Really, the state adopts the codes, and as you're aware, local governments enforce the building codes adopted at the state level. And that's really where this whole issue started, is working with local governments to explore opportunities to do what to help local governments do what they can do with what is in their purview. And this is where the idea of a voluntary stretch code comes into play. So a voluntary stretch code, simply defined, is a policy tool that is designed to promote and encourage buildings to achieve higher level of energy savings and reduced environmental impacts, as well as supporting the industry in adopting more advanced building practices and helping our communities, our cities and counties and other communities to achieve their sustainability goals, because we all of our communities have existing buildings and many have a lot of new buildings as well, especially with the rate of growth that we've been seeing in the last couple of years. So the goal of a voluntary stretch code policy and program is to encourage the new construction market specifically to go from just focusing on buildings that just meet the minimum energy code that is set by the state, or what I call the code minimum, and instead adopt a construction practice that becomes a standard that is that meets above code standards or above code certifications. And these standards and certifications are kind of a level up and level above the minimum energy code, or maybe several levels above the minimum energy code, that helps improve the energy affordability of buildings, reduces energy use, and reduces the emissions footprint from our homes and buildings. And these standards and certifications, there are many of them. I have a slide if you like to see it that I can share, but it's probably too much. So I just chose these four certifications pictured here on the right side of the screen that come from government programs like the EPA's Energy Star program, which I imagine most everyone has seen the Energy Star. There are Energy Star certified buildings, as Hannah alluded to, and there's a lot of Energy Star certified commercial buildings in Provo, which is exciting. Another government program is the United States Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home program, of which there are a number of homes that are built to that standard in the state of Utah. There are also nonprofit certifications, such as the U.S. Green Building Council's LEED certification, which I imagine folks are familiar with, as well as a nonprofit called the International Living Future Institute's Living Building Challenge, which is the most ambitious and regenerative and transformational third-party building certification. The point here is that the idea of the voluntary stretch code is to urge and coax and encourage and incentivize new construction to build toward meeting one of those standards rather than just the code minimum. And ways to do that include city or county resolutions or ordinances. It could be these policies could be adopted by city councils or county councils or planning commissions. And as Hannah mentioned, Utah Clean Energy has been facilitating a number of conversations over the last few months about what a concept like this might look like here in the state of Utah. And we've also started to explore what kind of incentives may be worth exploring, adopting into a program like this. And those incentives that are worth considering are things like are listed here. Considering waiving or reimbursing all or part of building permit fees, streamlining plan review of building construction permits that indicate that they're meeting one of these above code programs or certifications. There are some local governments that allow a variance in the regular zoning rules that allow increased height or increased square footage or increased density if those buildings or that building meets one of these above code certification programs. There are also incentives in the form of providing technical support, having a city building department, for example, have someone on contract who can be an on-call energy modeler or energy analyst. Or cities could consider subsidizing the cost of energy ratings or energy models for private developers who aren't yet familiar with energy analysis and energy models that are really, really essential to high performance buildings. And other incentives to consider, or one other incentive, maybe the last one, would be for the local government or maybe a group of local governments together to provide positive public recognition for those private sector developers and builders who are meeting these above code high performance building standards, and really recognizing those leaders. As I've alluded to, I've had the privilege of holding several collaborative phone calls over the last couple of months with representatives from the cities and counties who are listed here: Cottonwood Heights, Holiday, Ivins, Lehigh, Mill Creek, Moab. You see the list. We've been glad to have Dawn and Hannah join occasionally. Dawn Jarvis and Hannah join several of these meetings to add their thoughts and to learn. And really the goal of these conversations with different local government representatives is to start a conversation and grow the conversation about what local governments can do to support zero emission buildings in Utah. And we appreciate Dawn and Hannah's participation so far. And again, appreciate the opportunity to bring this to the council and put this on the council's radar. So I wanted to just point out two examples of probably the dozen or so policies and programs that are in place around the country that that fall into this category of stretch codes, voluntary stretch codes. One example that we came across recently, it's already on the books here in Utah in West Valley City, and it's called the Residential Sustainability Zone. It was adopted in 2020, and we're currently working to better understand if and how this approach that West Valley City took could become a model for other local governments to take. Basically, West Valley City's approach is to create this new optional residential sustainability zone, and if the benefit for a builder or developer is increased density, that is more dense than standard zoning for the residential zone in West Valley City. And in exchange for being able to build more housing units in the same piece of land, the developer voluntarily agrees to add these items that are on this bullet list here to the projects, which includes on-site solar power, improvement in efficiency of the home through improved insulation and more efficient space and water heating, as well as Energy Star appliances. The project would also need to include EV charging capacity for charging an electric vehicle, and importantly, also recognizing the value of water efficiency. So requiring that the projects also include WaterSense plumbing fixtures, which are WaterSense is an EPA certification for the most water efficient fixtures, as well as using WaterWise landscaping. This one that they recognize is called localscaping. Again, we've learned a little bit from West Valley about this, and our organization is looking into if this might be a model that other cities may want to include or to pursue. And we're excited and looking forward to continue the conversations with the local governments who we're in conversation with about if that's the case, what changes we might want to make, because since this was adopted, even though it was just 2 years ago, a lot has changed in this landscape of building efficiency and incentives and things that are available for more efficient buildings. Another city locally that is exploring this space and actually has been really leading out on this is Park City. They're exploring a voluntary stretch code, which they have been calling Net Zero Building Benchmark. This is an older version of their conceptual draft, so it may not reflect Park City's current thinking, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware that that there's another city looking at this. Their concept it came about through a stakeholder process that Utah Clean Energy was a part of just a couple of years ago, which was looking at how Summit County and Park City could meet their ambitious community emission reduction goals. And new construction was a priority on the radar because there's one time to get new construction right. And so the city was looking at offering different kinds of incentives to encourage new construction, both residential and commercial in Park City, to go above and beyond the basic energy code. So you can see some of the concepts here in terms of the benefits that Park City has been identifying through a program like this. This program and concept isn't yet fully fleshed out or in place in Park City, but there's active conversations about bringing a proposal to the Park City Council pretty soon, is my understanding. So I have a couple of other points of information that I want to share, and then I'd love to answer any questions that might come up. So when we talk about zero emission buildings, in a lot of cases, a lot of the the work in the building that will get a building from standard building to a zero emission building is very cost effective. And some of those things still cost, some of those approaches still cost more than standard practice. And so it's essential that we talk about financial incentives that can help a builder or developer adopt these new practices to reach zero emission buildings. And there's been some game-changing changes from the Federal Inflation Reduction Act that provide resources and opportunities for local governments to take advantage of and really leverage and align with those cities that are interested in exploring a program like this. So the first couple that I wanted to mention are expansion and extensions of federal tax incentives from the federal government. So there have been energy efficient new home tax credits on the books for a number of years. The Inflation Reduction Act included provisions that extend and expand the energy efficient new home tax credits up to $2,500 for a home that meets an Energy Star certification, and up to $5,000 per home for homes that meet the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home program. This is a busy slide, and I'm sorry for all the information. But there's also commercial buildings tax deduction. That's a federal tax deduction that's been on the books for a number of years, and it's been a permanent tax deduction. But the Inflation Reduction Act also expanded the commercial building tax deduction really to make it a lot more generous in what the tax deduction allows, up to $5 per square foot as a tax deduction. So the bigger the building, the bigger the tax deduction, because it's based on a square footage deduction, as long as that building meets a higher level of energy efficiency over and above the baseline energy code. A second program is not a tax incentive, but is a rebate program that will be developed at the state level. So there are two programs focused on existing residential structures, single family and multifamily. These programs are called the HOMES program and the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Program. The state of Utah, it just came out several weeks ago. The state of Utah's allocation for these two programs will be just over $100 million for the two programs. And it's about 50, as you can see on this table, $50 million per program. What's exciting is that back in the 2010 timeframe, the state of Utah had a very successful residential energy improvement kind of upgrade program that actually received national recognition. And this allocation of funding to the state of Utah will allow the state of Utah to bring that program back. You may remember it. It was called the Utah Home Performance Program. These two programs will be administered by the State Office of Energy Development, and there's a lot of details that need to be worked out, but the details are forthcoming. But I really wanted to put it on your radar because to the extent that in the future, in the next couple of years, cities receive permit applications for like replacing a furnace or replacing the windows or doing a gut rehab in a home. These two rebate programs will have the opportunity to be involved and to be used by those permit applicants who are making home improvements in your communities. And I think it'll be important for communities to help spread the word that this program exists once it is developed, so that families throughout the communities can take advantage of it. And the last kind of financial incentive that I wanted to put on the city's radar is actually a new state level incentive. It'll be a grant, and it was enabled through the passage of legislation earlier this year, Senate Bill 188, sponsored by Senator Kirk Cullimore. And this legislation provides, again, a state level grant of $5,000 per home for new homes or for existing homes. And there's a lot of details, again, in terms of exactly how efficient the home needs to be able to meet the criteria to receive these grants. But the main point of sharing this slide and the other slides with you is that there are a variety of financial incentives available to the market, either through tax credits or tax deductions or grants to new builders that align with the idea of a community level voluntary stretch code. cities shouldn't, because of these resources, cities shouldn't need to think about providing, financial incentives themselves because these financial incentives are available. But they absolutely should be considered when developing a voluntary stretch code program. There's a lot more that I could talk about, but I wanted to really kind of set the stage with that information at this point. I would love to talk further with the whole city council or individual members of the city council or others at Provo City to see how Utah Clean Energy could support the city in developing a program like this. The one important point I want to leave you with is, again, we're talking with a number of local governments together. We think it's imperative that any program like this, where there's interest among local governments, that the program be designed to be consistent between local governments. So architects and engineers and contractors and developers don't have 10 or 15 different programs and different certifications to meet, but that there's one common approach among local government stretch code programs. So I'd love to answer any questions that you might have, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Emerson. Could you just clarify what you were just saying at the end there? You're saying that if we were to adopt something, you are recommending that we do something that's consistent with what other cities are doing. Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
so that
exactly.
it's not too varied from one city to another?
Yes, there ideally would be the same kind of standards in terms of if the local government is promoting, a zero energy ready standard is the standard that would allow would kind of be the target standard for the particular cities kind of to be eligible to receive the benefits through the voluntary stretch code program. So that really, yes, the goal should be for local governments to adopt the same standards. So there's not a patchwork of different standards that the private sector have to navigate. Similar to the way that the energy code is adopted at the state level, there's not varying energy codes between cities and counties, as there are in some states. And that feedback from some of the folks in the development community who I've spoken with have really stressed that that's important, that all the local governments considering this kind of policy adopt the same standards that the developers would need to meet.
All right, thank you. That clarifies it for me. I had one other question. I'm sure my colleagues might have others. Could you comment a little bit on how this might impact development? I mean, we want development in the city. We need housing in the city and other kinds of development in the city. But so if we were to adopt something, we would want to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, and have something that has the net result of more energy efficient, lower emission buildings, but also we would prefer not to do something that tamps down development itself, or discourages developers from wanting to work with Provo. Have you seen any of that problem emerging, or is there, what advice would you give to us about whether or not we would run that risk?
Yeah, well, I guess the advice, to answer your first question, I haven't seen that be an issue because at the foundation, we're talking about a voluntary program. So there wouldn't be, if there's a developer who's interested in building us in Provo, if a program like this were established, they could just develop in kind of the normal way. This would be really a matter of just this kind of program would be just a matter of encouraging that builder to think about building to a higher level of performance. And they could choose it if they wanted to, and if they chose not to, then they could still develop, the way that they kind of more of their standard practice. So I don't think that it would have any kind of effect of reducing development in a community because it would be purely voluntary and purely optional.
Does it bring, is there a bonus in the sense that it could attract more high quality development because people, my sense is this is the wave of the future in that industry. So it seems to me that if the word is on the street that Provo's in that game, then it could attract more innovative developers.
Absolutely. I think you're exactly right. I think this kind of policy would catch the attention of those builders who are maybe on the fence, or those developers who are on the fence, or starting to get into this space of kind of the next wave of innovation in terms of constructing our communities. We have a couple of builders in the state that have done a couple of buildings that are more on this level, the kind of the zero emission buildings. There's a couple of developers who are doing it as standard practice, or something very close to this as standard practice. A community adopting a policy and a program like this that rewards builders for taking the next step will definitely bring a greater level of attention from those high quality builders and developers. And also importantly, we're really thinking about how this would impact families and businesses in the future. So those buildings that are constructed to this higher level of energy performance, they also tend to be more affordable to operate. They tend to be more comfortable and also have quality, improved construction quality. So there are those kind of quantifiable and non-quantifiable benefits that last over the decades that these new buildings stand as well for the community.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council? Chipley?
So I'm trying to think through how to coordinate with other cities, for example, in Utah County on the incentive programs. And I'm kind of, I guess I'm struggling with how different cities with, different, permitting processes and things like that can kind of coordinate these incentives. But I wonder if there are examples in the state on counties that have done that effectively. And I also wonder what of these incentives in your mind are maybe a place to start with trying to coordinate with other cities in a place like Utah County?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. This concept is really breaking new ground. No pun intended. It hasn't been done to my knowledge in where there's a kind of a cohort of local governments working together and collaborating on this. My advice would be, and I have not talked with folks at groups like the League of Cities and Towns, for example, but I think there would be a lot of value in having a formal organization who represents the interests of cities and maybe have the counties involved in there as well, to convene a group that that can help bring communities together, as well as organizations like ours who have the kind of the expertise in kind of the energy, clean energy policy space. There may be other similar processes that don't deal with energy that I'm unaware of, but again, this is really kind of breaking new ground. So to my knowledge, at this point, there aren't really any models to follow. So we'd be really doing something very innovative to address those goals that our communities have, in this one way through how we're constructing our communities in the future.
Mr. Jarvis, did you have another question?
Oh, he's got an answer to that.
Oh, did you want to comment on the question, or did you have another question? Okay, go ahead.
This is more a question than a comment. But I guess correctly, Kevin, that you would say that the most important thing is not necessarily the programs for incentives, but the standards that are applied for those programs. And there are, you mentioned 4 recognized standards. Could we maybe concentrate on those recognized standards and maybe put on the back burner working to, questions about exactly what our incentives would look like? I think the first thing should be standards, and then the program second. Am I correct on that?
I think that's a good point. Really, I mean, there's a bunch of moving parts that I think that cities need to think through. But when it comes to coordinating among local governments, really the most important thing is what standard that's the above code standard, whether or not that's Energy Star or the Zero Energy Ready standard, or percent better than code, for example. Those really should be harmonized between local governments, more so than what benefits that the community offers.
And those standards should be fairly easy to identify, right?
the standards are very easy to identify. And again, I have just since we're talking about this, I'm going to skip to a bunch of slides that I didn't cover, but there are a number of standards here. This is not on the PDF that I sent to the council because it's kind of an extra slide, so I apologize. But for those who can see it, there are probably 6 to 8 standards, and that are fairly common in Utah. There may be more like a dozen that have some are used in some degree in the state of Utah, and of those there's probably really 3 to 4 that we would recommend pursuing. And obviously we don't want to put the cart before the horse, but if there is interest, we would absolutely devote our time to help the council understand which incentives are the right, which standards are the right standards to prioritize, and how to make sure there's enough flexibility, but really with a focus on having a uniform approach to the same standards across the state, by local governments.
We're running kind of late. We probably have time for another question or not. If not,
Well,
go ahead, Mr.
Just as a
Shipley.
follow-up to that, I guess I would encourage us to coordinate what those standards are as a county. I think that sounds like an important thing to me. And then as a city, I'm fully supportive of looking at policy sooner than later that incentivizes developers to to use efficiency standards, whether or not that's an incentive of just a little bit faster process, permitting, whether or not that's a little bit of a density bonus, something like that. I know we've talked about those things in the past, but we haven't had anything in code or policy to help guide that conversation. And I think it's highly worthwhile for us to try to put something in policy.
All right. Thank you. I concur, certainly. Well, thank you, Mr. Emerson and Hannah, for your presentation today. We're grateful for your patience with our technical difficulties. We're going to move on to item number 2. And let me just explain that in order to fix this camera problem, we're going to need to take a break. We have a break scheduled, but I'd like to do it sooner. So I'd like to take a break after item number 2. So that would put off our general plan discussion by just 10 more minutes, if that's all right, so that we can get the camera fixed. And then hopefully for that presentation, the public can have a camera to look at. So this is item number 2 is a discussion regarding staff's report on potential amendments to accessory dwelling unit petition permit process. Malia Daly, our policy analyst, will present this item.
Okay. All right. I'm just to give some context for this. The next slide is kind of busy, so I'm not going to turn to it yet. But remember on October 18th in the council meeting, when we passed the ADU amendments that we were working on, there was a unanimous motion made by the council for staff to review the feasibility and language for an anonymous petition process for the permit pathway that was added to chapter 1430. So this is a report back. The housing committee met twice. So the housing committee met on November 2nd and November 10th. We met with planning staff, code enforcement staff, also with the IS team, talking about bringing in some electronic elements and IS systems to help maybe find an anonymous petition process. After those meetings, the housing committee is coming to the council and reporting and recommending to not go forward with an anonymous petition amendment. So I'm just going to go over briefly the options in brief that were discussed, and then kind of some concerns that were identified. But then I want this time for counselors to ask questions of housing committee, of staff, just so we can clear things up both for us, but also for the public, because I understand that this recommendation was from the public. So we want to make sure that everyone has full information. So in housing committee, there was several options discussed. I kind of boiled it down to 2 main ones. In the memo that is published online for the public, and then it goes into more detail than what is here on this presentation. But here we discussed planning staff sending out mailers or emails, or actually having phone calls to the appropriate residential immediate property owners, and letting them know about the ADU application, the property that is applying for that, and then how they can submit their signature, that the application is for a permit for the property and not just for that owner, and so it runs with the land. You know, and we talked about this being either physically or electronically receiving the signatures back, either through a return mailer, or people could come into City Hall, or there was some form of Qualtrics survey or other secure survey system or software that we could use to verify those signatures and gather them electronically. So that was one kind of option we discussed. There was another option, second to the first one, where we talked about an applicant themselves. So the applicant comes in, they want to apply, they get the list of properties that they need to get signatures from, and then they themselves go out with a postcard or a flyer or email with a link or a QR code to an electronic survey for the property owner to take to gather those signatures, or a physical one. And in that case, the property owner with the signature would need to come in and bring that into City Hall. Before I go over concerns, housing committee members, I want to make sure that I am characterizing those options correctly to your knowledge. You don't have to add anything if you don't want, but I just want to make sure. Okay, I'm going to take silence as a yes. So then these are, again, these are a summary of the concerns that were identified on the memo. There's some more detail there if you'd like to refer to that. So we discussed, you know, this idea of a non-answer. If planning staff were to send out things, if someone didn't answer, is that a yes or a no? Staff being unable to reach a property owner. We talked about, you know, rectifying this with a timeline of 30 days. Someone has to reach, but is staff then obligated to reach out once a week or twice a week or every 3 days? How often do they have to reach out to property owners to make sure that they were contacted? That might place city staff in a compromising position if, you know, an applicant is one signature away, but then someone says, well, I never heard about it. And so we played out some kind of what if scenarios. We also talked about the authentic anonymous signatures. And so there was some solutions about requiring the signee to have to sign a statement attesting to the validity of their signature, and that would be on them if they chose to sign that and it not be their actual signature. And we also, this is where we talked to IS about some possibility of software that can actually validate signatures and validate identities, and making sure that the voting and the signature gathering is legitimate. IS, looking at those software, says that it would be very expensive and require some additional staff bandwidth from their department as well as planning. We also discussed that all anonymous signatures at any time could be made public with a grandma request. So they're not truly anonymous. They could be made public at any time. We also discussed digital literacy barriers for those residents that maybe don't have access to internet, or maybe they don't quite understand how to navigate the digital landscape in order to submit their signatures. And then lastly, this staff has informed us, and we talked through this as a council about ways we could support them. But in the end, you know, this would increase the burden on city staff for a process that originally it was written to be applicant and grassroots driven. That doesn't, as mentioned in the memo, that doesn't mean that it couldn't change, but as it's written, that was kind of the intent and how it came out of housing committee. And so housing committee at the end of this is directed staff to include an update on the petition process specifically in their ADU report that is coming to council next year, with specific attention paid to how the applicants feel about the signature gathering process, and also those that are being solicited for their signatures and how that is going, and try and get feedback and report that to council. And at that time, council can revisit this issue or write a new amendment or take any direction that they see fit. So that's kind of how the housing committee went about this study, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sure housing committee members as well.
Thank you. Questions? Fillmore?
Yeah, thank you, Malia. I appreciate your presentation. I appreciate the effort that's gone into this from a staff perspective, but I'm disappointed. I'm genuinely worried about the negative impact this can have on neighbors. If someone wants an ADU and the neighbors surrounding that house don't want an ADU, then they're put to a devil's choice. They could either be quiet and try and live with something they really dislike, or they can speak up and risk their relationship with their neighbor that wants the ADU. I think this has huge potential for negative feelings, ramifications in a neighborhood, whether you're talking about just a neighborhood per se or a ward or whatever. I think it creates huge potential for bad feelings. I think there's a reasonable answer to every concern you've raised. For example, does a non-answer mean a yes or a no? You could send out the notice, however, saying if we don't hear from you, it's a no or it's a yes. I mean, we could simply legislate, what a non-answer means. And I realize that this places an additional burden on city staff, but that's why we exist, right? We have things, we take on those burdens if we think it's the right thing to do. My larger concern is that, when the original concept of ADUs, the concept of optional ADU applications in a neighborhood outside the, southwest part of town, where any neighborhood, if the neighborhood approved it by a certain margin, then that would be okay. And that general concept I thought was legitimate. If a neighborhood is fine with an ADU, then so be it. But originally the concept was a neighborhood, not necessarily the full neighborhood like, Provost or whatever, but at least some larger area, because the impact of an ADU is not limited to the person next door. It's limited to everybody on that street and potentially beyond. And that's my primary concern. I could live with the absence of an anonymous approach if the radius was larger, if there were more people having an input. And I have to think that the people who have been discussing this for the past several weeks really gave very little credence to the neighbors who came to our meeting in October and expressed their concerns. It's kind of like we're brushing them aside. They had very legitimate concerns, and I'd say 90% of those people that commented were against this approach, where only the adjacent neighbors had a say, because it affects them all. And so when you come back with this recommendation to do nothing, I understand technical challenges, but I think we're ignoring a major concern by many people in various neighborhoods around the city. And we're making it, and so a lot of people, because Provo have to get pretty worked up before they'll take a stand that they know is going to offend a neighbor. So a lot of people are just going to knuckle under. They're going to bite their tongue and say, well, I don't want to ruin my relationship with Mr. Smith next door. And so we're getting up a situation where we're going to have acquiescence to something they really don't like, which is not a positive thing for building happy, stable neighborhoods. I just think the human nature of reaction to this kind of approach is going to be very problematic. I'm just opposed to it, but we could ameliorate that somewhat if we expand the radius so people down the street have the right to speak up, not just somebody who lives next door. I think, and I assumed with our discussion last October that that was part and parcel of what you folks would be considering, not just simply the anonymity issue, but you were taking into account the larger concern expressed by a dozen plus citizens at the October meeting that they wanted a say about ADUs in their smaller neighborhood, at least on the same street, that kind of thing. But I don't see that that was addressed at all. In fact, it seems to have been ignored. And that's kind of troubling. So I would ask the council to reconsider, if not the anonymity issue, at least expanding the radius of those who are entitled to comment or against an ADU application.
Councilor Whipple?
Thank you, Malia, and also thank you, Councilor Fillmore. I really appreciate your thoughtful comments. We really explored as many options as we could to try to do an anonymous process. And Malia described a little bit about that, but we kept suggesting different things, different means to do it. And they either were going to be incredibly expensive or they were going to take a huge amount of staff time. And none of them could guarantee anonymity, especially with the option of doing a grammar request. And since we couldn't meet that primary objective at all, even though we like the idea of being able to take the pressure off somebody at the moment, you know, in the door where somebody's there with a paper for them to sign and like try to give a little bit of space for them to consider it. It just didn't seem to be practical. One thing that I think is worth remembering is that our current process for getting, or our previous process for getting ADUs as a spot rezone introduced the same kind of contention that you're concerned about with this new, more administrative process, in that we had people coming before us saying, this is what we need. This is why. Some of their neighbors would come to these meetings to speak in favor of it. Others' neighbors would come and speak against it. It was the same kind of dynamic, but it was happening here at the council meetings. And maybe the best thing about this process is that it has the potential to be much more efficient, and that it's not all coming before the council to make that decision. And one thing that made us feel better about going ahead is that we are going to have the 6-month review. And again, you know, in a year, so that our staff who are actually working with the people who are going through this process can come back and tell us what's working, what's not working. They can tell us if these fears that our neighbors have expressed to us are actually being realized. Sometimes, as we're anticipating a change, we anticipate the worst possible options, and those never happen. And so I want to know if this process is good, and we are completely willing to change it as soon as we see that it's bad. Or if we see that it's good, continue on with it or tweak it or whatever the appropriate response is. And I think that it would be good to wait for at least that 6 months before we look at expanding the number of people who would have a say in it, to see if it's really necessary. That will give us time to get feedback and to really assess it, so that we are working from actual data instead of from speculation. I will say that one way to avoid all of this would just be to expand ADUs everywhere. And then you have nobody put in a position of denying their neighbors' property rights or an expansion of their property rights. And that is not something that it seems many of the citizens in our city are ready for right now, which is why we're doing this very small incremental kind of YIMBY approach where people could come together and say yes for something, as opposed to opening up in a way that the city's not quite there for. And this compromise, I think, is a careful and measured thing, and it's something that is not one and done. It's something that we're going to consider as we see how it works.
Thank you. I'd like to make a comment just for clarification. So this item, it came back to us because of a request for the exploring the anonymous process, but we did not pass a motion at the last meeting to explore expanding the circle. So if that's something that Mr. Fillmore, you would like to propose, that would require a motion, because that was not the motion a month ago. And this item will sort of die by no action unless there's a motion to propose something alternative to this. So just to let you know what your options are.
I'm prepared to make a motion.
Okay.
First couple of questions. With respect to the grandma matter, did you consult with our counsel on that? Was there a way to sidestep that where there's grounds for non-amenity?
So we did speak with our counsel about that. We didn't talk about ways getting around it, like your personally identifiable information and everything like that. But when somebody submits their information to the city, like we could redact some information in response to a grandma request, like address or something, but I don't think because the pool of people who would be identified by this grandma request are a very small pool, they would end up being identifiable, right? If you've got 10 neighbors who could have potentially responded to one of these anonymous surveys and you get your grandma results back, it's going to be almost impossible to remove all of the identifiable information. So it's going to be coming out. Gary, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, grandma is long enough and complicated enough that I would not heard a response. I think to give a confident answer, we would need to search and look at it. I would note, though, that the baseline of grandma is that things are presumed to be public until they are requested, and then the appropriate department or division, what have you, has to then make a classification at that time. So I think what we would need to do is look at those private, protected, and controlled categories and see whether any of them could be defensible. That's generally what our department does. I think that, as indicated, it's probably true that private identifiers like addresses and email addresses, things of that nature, redacted, but I don't know about names.
You gonna make a motion?
Here's my concern. When we discussed this a year ago, the concept was go slow. Let's make sure we meet state requirements. Let's experiment here on the southwest side, see how that goes. But the idea was beyond that, it required, and we often use the term neighborhood approval. But somehow, when it came out in the wash, it's just the immediately adjacent neighbors. I'm concerned about the people who live down the street are going to say, I had no say in this, but I really dislike it, whether it's traffic, parking, whatever it might be. And I'm concerned that people are going to be suborned into approving it if they're immediate neighbor. They may really dislike it, but out of sensitivity to their neighborhood and trying to have good community relations, they're gonna bite their tongue. But in any event, whether it's people who speak out because they're really against it, and they don't care about the neighbor's feelings, or people who simply bite their tongue but don't like it, we're inadvertently creating a neighborhood animosity program. I mean, it has huge potential for that. So my motion, okay? I'd like to go back to what I thought we were doing with this ADU program a year ago, before it somehow morphed into this adjacent issue. Seems to me, well, so I'll just make a motion. The motion is that we amend the ordinance that was adopted to require approval. What was the percentage approval of the?
Well, sorry to interrupt, but Gary, we can't, I mean, he can make a motion to recommend that we come back with a draft of something, but we can't actually approve an amendment right now.
That's right.
So if you, let me just, in the interest of order here in terms of our agenda, can I ask first that we just decide what to do with this council staff recommendation? How would that be?
Fine. I mean, I'm happy to make a motion along the lines you're suggesting.
Okay.
I agree. It's inappropriate to pass the motion I was picking away at here. The motion I would make is that we ask staff to consider expanding the neighborhood radius for those who have a right to speak up yay or nay on a particular ADU application and come back to us with some reasonable alternatives.
Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion of this item?
Can I
Please.
ask something? Can you put a timeline on that? Because there is confusion about time on this one, so I just
To
wanted,
come back with the recommendations
yes.
the day before Christmas. No, I just,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
It's like,
Really,
okay.
I'm sorry.
She went ashen.
No, Malia, come back to us early in January with that. Okay. Sorry to tease you like that.
All right, is
No
there
worries.
a discussion of this item? My personal preference would be to wait until, I mean, I do think this is an interesting question. I talked to some citizens afterwards and said we would evaluate what we had passed when we had more data, but I'm pretty sympathetic to what Councillor Whipple said. I think at this point, I'd rather look at the experience of the current ordinance with some data and move forward at that point, because I think no matter where we draw that circle differently than what we've currently done, we'll be speculating about a lot of things that we don't yet have any firm experience with. And so my preference is to say no to this motion. Any other discussion?
I just add the obvious concern that if you wait 6 or 12 months, whatever happens in the interim is then irreversible. And why not get data on a more reasonable radius? The data is the issue. Let's get a different radius that's more fair to the concerns expressed by so many of our citizens and get data on that, see how it works.
All right. Is there any more discussion of the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote on the motion. I'll begin with you, Councillor Fillmore.
Yes, on that motion.
I will vote no. Councillor Hoban. Councillor Hoban, are you there? Okay, Councillor, we'll pause for a second. Councillor McKay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hoban.
Yeah, sorry. I voted yes. Thank you.
Councillor McKay.
Yes.
Councillor Shipley.
No.
Councillor Whipple.
No.
Okay, we're missing Councillor Ellsworth and we're tied 3-3. She had to step out for a call. Oh, she just stepped back in. All right. Did you follow any of that conversation? Okay. I think what can we do about this? Mr. Millward, do you have any recommendations? Can I revote or? Well, we were going to take a vote, or we were going to take a break, yes. But I don't know what's your recommendation, Mr. Millward?
It seemed to me that well, I would like to check the handbook, frankly, but offhand, my thinking would be if we took the break and listened to that part of the portion of the record and then enter a vote. That possible with the
The motion is that to request staff to go back and come, what was not about this particular recommendation, that didn't get a motion, but the motion was, so this recommendation needs no motion unless the desire of the council is to go against the recommendation. Status quo remains. Mr. Fillmore motioned that to instruct the staff to go back and come back with a recommendation about a potential expansion of the circle of neighbors who would be solicited to provide input on whether or not an ADU. And we had some discussion about whether or not that should wait until we had more data with the current thing, or whether we should get that right, change that now. I don't know if Mr. Fillmore, that's an accurate.
Fair enough.
Vote now, or should I, or is there some protocol that we need to follow?
Well, we just finished the vote. I hadn't even, I was just about to call your name. So I'm gonna say that it's okay that I just explained it to you.
Okay, so
with that.
the chair is saying that this is within the protocol for me to vote.
Yes.
And so my vote would be no to that motion.
All right. So that's 4 opposed with counselors Fillmore, Hoban, and McKay in favor. The rest of us opposed. Okay, so I'll just say by way of sort of editorial comment, I think these questions are all important for us to revisit when we get staff reports in a 5 months time now at this point on the first iteration of their experience. So I will look forward to that conversation when that comes. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to request a break for 10 minutes. So we'll return at 3:05 and then we'll have our discussion on item number 3.
Recording stopped.
Holding down the car button for a while.
Understands how they look.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can see a lot better, like see out and people
Yeah.
can see them.
I mean, if there's any adjustments, let me know.
One thing they were asking, is this gonna be the permanent monitor setup or is it gonna be changing when we get everything?
I think these would be permanent.
These are permanent.
Yeah. I don't
Okay.
think they're changing.
Cause I didn't think we have anything different for that.
No, those.
I was
those
like,
ones
I've
just
tried-
stay.
I've stopped trying to
Recording in progress.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for your patience. We'll now turn to item number 3. So again, we'll go from item number 3 directly into item number 4, both of which are related to, well, let's see, general plan part 1 and part 2. So we have a total of just under 2 hours for that. We do not have a closed session requested. Anyway, I'm just sort of laying out the land here. And let me just clarify a couple of quick things for the council. The general plan amendments are going to the Planning Commission on December 7th next week. So we will officially, deliberate and vote on the general plan after we hear back from the Planning Commission. But in the interest of keeping our process going and the conversation and the feedback from the council going, we're still going to have these sessions where we're going to go through the portions of the general plan. So, yes.
So to clarify, what we're reviewing today is going before the Planning Commission next week.
Correct. The whole of it's going before the Planning Commission, correct, next week. But we're just going to do our own iterative sort of review and feedback process in the meantime. And then when we get their recommendation, presumably nothing that we say or do at this point is going to so substantively revise the general plan that we would have to go back a third time. So we're just, does that make sense? So
But today's not about editing anything before it gets to the Planning Commission next week.
Well, we can offer suggestions for what we would like to see or not like to see in the general in this portion that we've seen, and maybe depending on what we're proposing, they probably could make those changes if there's or a majority agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that could happen by next week? It's just that the other portions that we haven't looked at, of course, will not be subject to that same review process prior to the Planning Commission meeting.
I think the Planning Commission frankly would appreciate, the feedback that you give. And that was our intent, was to come here and get feedback from you today to inform the process. So.
Okay.
Portions, I'm sorry. Which portions are we reviewing today?
1 and 2. There were 3 documents you sent, though. There was the introduction or whatever it was called.
Yeah. So the way I when I set this up with council staff, the idea was to go through basically the first half with you today. So you go through chapters 1 through 3 in the first hour, second hour to go through 4 through 6 today. So first half of the general plan.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't able to read the entire thing given the holiday and travel, so I'm not totally prepared to make edits today. Is there a possibility we can make edits on another day?
Yes, I assume that. Well, one thing that I know staff would appreciate is that if we have suggestions for edits, rather than individually throwing a suggestion at them either in the meeting or offline, they need to know that it's at least something that the majority of the council agrees with. Otherwise, they don't know what instructions they're supposed to follow, and it can get really confusing very quickly. So, but presumably, Brandon, anything that we want to suggest to you, to staff to include or not include in the general plan between now and the time we get it from the Planning Commission, as long as there's a majority of us who agree, we can get that in, correct?
Yeah, that's
okay.
That
so it doesn't all have to happen today. That makes sense. Yes.
All right. I have a question also about edits. I unfortunately really only do well editing on hard copy. So it's hard for me to circulate that through the rest of the council to get their approval before I give it to Brandon. But if things are more stylistic and not substantive, does that matter?
You want to comment on
and
that?
who makes that determination?
Yeah, I would say stylistic edits, non-substantive issues, corrections, just turn into the staff. If it's a substantive issue, then a vote of the council would be really helpful.
Okay.
And if you feel, I'll just say this, if you feel, staff feels that there's some ambiguity as to whether or not it rises to that level, I would prefer that you let us know.
Sure.
Say, hey, we would prefer getting clear instructions from the council as a whole on this, because this could potentially have implications of more substance than is at first.
So is it okay if those issues, if we rise to any of those, that we bring them to council leadership, or do you want something sent to the entire council?
Well, because you'd want the whole council's feedback on that, we would want it to eventually have everyone see it. I just don't know what the most efficient way to do that is. We could, you could funnel back to the leadership a list of items that you've received from various counselors that you deem to need full council weigh-in, and we could send out an email
We'd
to
like
that effect to everybody.
We'd like to do as much of this correcting as we can through emails. We could. That would help this move along, I think.
I think you should take the liberty of just doing that directly to the council and not require any leadership feedback. I mean, if you have a specific question, you could certainly pose that to us. But I think if you gathered feedback and you felt like there were 5 or 6 or however many items that required all of us to weigh in, you could just point us to exactly where on the document we should go and what the suggestion is. And
okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
But I think we all agree. We obviously all want to have our input, and we want to make sure we all feel good about it. We don't want to make it convoluted and protracted. We'd like this to move along. So
absolutely.
All right. Any other preliminary questions before you probably have, Brandon, some, and let me just say thank you to you and Hannah and others who I know, and I know the department heads and others have weighed in on this. I know this has been a lot of work, and we acknowledge that and appreciate it very much.
Glad to be able to work with the city on this. Like you said, we of course went through and did a survey, and after that we went and redrafted it based on the results that we had and circulated it through the department and got feedback. And then after we had retooled it based on that, we took it to the department heads and got some additional feedback, visited with the administration, and then retooled it again. It's been through several revisions, and so we feel really, really good about it. We feel like a lot of effort's been put into it. I personally never been involved in a process. I've done this for 15 years and not been involved in a process that's been so thoroughly vetted in the public and had so much input and so much care has been taken to make sure we get it right. And so I really appreciate that. So what I wanted to do today is kind of give you a little bit of an idea of what we've done in the interim with this document. And then kind of, like I said, first hour or so, I was planning on kind of addressing, first hour I was going to give you a brief presentation on chapters 1 through 3, and then kind of turn the time over to you to talk about that. And then when we come back in the second hour, we'll give you another brief presentation on chapters 4 through 6, and then let you guys give us some feedback. So wanted to start out by letting you know that this document, the vision statement's still the same. Still has a really good fresh look to it. I really appreciate Hannah has some really good graphic talents, graphic artistry talents, and so you can thank her for the way that looks. I think it's really good. I think the document's still very slim for the most part. I think we were at around roughly 80 pages, and I think we're up to the main documents 102. Of course, when you start adding in the appendices, it gets longer than that, but still pretty slim. And the commitments, we still have clear commitments at the start of each one of these chapters. And we feel like the document still has a strong sense of belonging for all the Provo city residents, that it values our natural resource, that the value of natural resources heavily underscored in the document, and that active and alternative transportation is still an important goal. We also believe that there's some easy to find actionable goals in this document. The last chapter is, I believe, 24 pages of actionable goals. So what's different here is the content was informed by the Y2 survey. Y2 Analytics did a great job for us and gave us some fantastic data. And we feel that based on that information, we were able to make some changes that were in line with what we felt the citizens were saying. We took the old document and reordered the chapters and renamed them. One of my frustrations with the past document was the titles, welcoming community, grow together. As a user of the document, planners often use that document to prepare general plans, and I want to see like land use and transportation and housing. And so what we did was rename the document to say transportation, housing, but we added kept that human touch that the previous version had, kind of transportation, and added that human touch to it at the end. So we did that. One of the other things that staff noticed was that when you look at, for instance, the Grow Together chapter from the previous version was a combination of land use and historical issues, concerns. There were other I think it was Livable Provo was housing and economics kind of put together in one. And, our state code tells us that we have to have a land use element. We have to have a transportation element. We need to have a modern income housing element and water element that will be coming. But I think our staff's thought was that we needed to have more clear chapters. And so we have a definitive land use chapter now. We have a definitive housing chapter. When we looked back at our old general plan, we noticed that it had a public services and safety chapter, and when we looked at other jurisdictions, they also had a public services and safety chapter. So we made sure that we got that in there. And so we wanted that document to be accessible and easy to get into and use. There were a lot of topics that we felt were under addressed. When I get a zone application, I rely heavily on the land use chapter I look in that and I compare the proposed zone amendment against the policies in there, and there weren't a lot of policies to go off of. And I compared that to our old general plan, and it was too long. Our current general plan's too long, but there just wasn't enough depth addressed, especially in land use. And so we definitely wanted to correct some of those things that we thought were deficiencies. So with that, let me give you, what I'm going to do now is just kind of give you a little introduction to the first three chapters. So the first one is an introduction. The introduction, again, one of the important things that this chapter does is it sets forth the chapters for the rest of the document. And so, of course, you'll see the chapters reordered there, renamed, additional chapters. In that introduction, we talk a lot about how we got public input. I think it reveals that there's a really thorough public process, and of course, because we had a Y2 survey, we added discussion about that in there. This introduction helps to make the rest of the document more user friendly by setting forth the chapters. We eliminated some kind of unnecessary language about process, language we felt was unnecessary. It was kind of laborious, so we eliminated some language. Also, we also noticed that a lot of cities had a kind of a community identity chapter. And I think it was somewhat similar to the welcoming Provo chapter from the previous version, but we wanted to have that concrete community identity chapter. And so we took Provo historical information and then census data and booted it to the community identity section. So that was eliminated in the introduction. Going on to community identity, again, we had this chapter is meant to kind of give a snapshot of Provo's identity, what its citizens are like, what the government's like, and so forth. And so we give an idea, we give some historical information. There's some census and demographic information. One expansion there or thing that we added to that was a little discussion on age. Of course, age is kind of an interesting thing in this city. It's an interesting dynamic. 1 in 5 of our residents are under the age of 18, and we have a lot of students. So we thought that it'd be good to have a little discussion on age. There's a solid section on belonging, or you can use inclusive or welcoming. We chose to use the word belonging. And then we got some feedback, a lot of feedback from Public Works, and they felt that we should have a little discussion about, again, that, with our discussion about demographics, they wanted us to talk a little bit about or reference a little bit about daytime versus nighttime population, because that helps them in kind of, I think that would be related to kind of capital improvement planning type stuff there. So that addition was helpful to them. So we added some added that section. So again, this section, this chapter was meant to kind of give a snapshot of Provo's identity and set the course for the rest of the document. And then finally, land use. This one was probably this document was the one that was the most expanded. There actually was no land use element before, standalone land use element. And so we established one in this version and expanded the topics that were addressed. It was helpful to get survey data from Y2. Citizens gave their input on what development types they thought were really needed in the city. And it was, as I think back, I mean, there was discussion about mixed use, single family housing, things like that. But it was helpful to get solid data from a statistically valid sample of residents on what development types they felt were appropriate for the city. And that was really helpful in informing our policies that we're proposing. So one of the things that the old or the current general plan, hopefully outgoing general plan does is it talks a lot about annexations and what to do in the event of an annexation or the disconnection of boundary adjustment, like we've got a boundary adjustment with Springville going on. There was none of that in the proposal in the old version that was brought to you a year ago. So we added some of that, quite a bit in about that, added some maps. And along with another topic that was heavily addressed that we felt was important was design standards. One of the great things about Provo is we have a really good design corridor. We have 5 design corridors and we have a number of others that we want to establish. And so we wanted to make sure that those standards along with others were included in the land use section. Took out the future land use map. We made a new general plan. We are proposing an updated general plan map and including that as Appendix D. So kind of a snapshot of what we've done in land use, but it's a much more extensive chapter that will be really helpful as we evaluate, applications, zone map amendments, and other developments as they come into us. So that's what I wanted to share with you on the as we get started here on those 3 chapters. And so with that, I'll I'm open to feedback and ready to take your questions. So
Thank you, Councilor McKay.
I just want to say that I thought the whole plan, as I read it, was wonderful. I thought it was much more concise and clear and balanced. The other one was difficult in the sense that you'd find some stuff in one chapter, but then the same topic in another chapter, a lot of repetition. I thought this was a lot cleaner and easier to manage.
thank you.
Looking at me like you want to make a comment, Councilor Whipple.
Chancellor Whipple looks like she has something.
Do you not want to?
Well, I'll be sending my edits. I really echo Councilor McKay's comments. I appreciate the work. I do have some editorial comments, like for example, in chapter 3 on land use, the development history and potential is the same as the land use challenges, except for the last paragraph in land use challenges on annexation. So like 3 or 4 paragraphs are exactly the same in those 2 sections that are right after each other. So things like that
Right.
aren't significant, but we do want to clean up. So that's why I'll be doing a hard copy edit for you so that I don't bore everyone with the tediousness of my like college editing things as a TA. I don't want to do that to all of you. Just you.
I appreciate that.
But thank you for doing this. I really appreciate the work on it.
Thank you.
Elmore?
Just a general comment, Brandon. Thank you to you and your colleagues, Bill and Keith, and everyone else that was involved. This is a huge improvement over the prior draft, that so much more logical, balanced, and addresses issues that were underemphasized. And I'm very pleased with. I'll get you some comments here in the future, but it's just a general statement. Thank you for a yeoman's effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask for clarification? So you're saying today we're going to talk about introduction. Right now we're talking about introduction chapters 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
But then you sent red line versions of those.
Mm-hmm.
But then but we're doing 4, 5, and 6 in the next hour.
Well, after the break,
or whatever. I
whatever,
mean, but
yeah.
today.
Yes, today.
Because I didn't see those. I mean, I see them in the link, but did you send the red line versions of those?
Last night I did. I sent all the other red lines for the entire document last night.
I must not have seen that for. I still don't see. You sent chapters 1 and 3 last night. Oh no, there they are. All
Yeah.
okay.
At 5, about 5 p.m. last night.
Oh, why am I? Yeah, okay. Somehow my email did not flag that as a new email. Okay. So I'll have to look. I only looked through the red line versions of 1 through 3, which I quite liked, and it was very helpful to have the red line just to kind of see the logic of what you were doing. And I didn't, nothing I read raised any flags for me. I thought in those 3, I thought things good. Maybe I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but I did have a question about the housing because we got that email from the state saying that they didn't find we met the requirements quite yet so what's the status of that and what will that mean?
Hannah, do you mind coming up here? And We kind of all took turns on, Hannah and I took turns on that. And I think she tried to address those the end of last week. And I think they were relatively easy fixes, were they not?
Yeah, those fixes were all super simple. Like we took the conservative approach of saying, consider option X. They wanted us to just say their exact language to do option X, define some timelines, things like that. They were all really minor. They've all been fixed. And I have a Zoom call next week with Department of Workforce Services to make sure that we're in compliance. That won't affect the housing chapter itself. This is just going to be Appendix B. That's our moderate income housing report. And we've separated the goals. So you might notice in the housing chapter, there's a note that says, see Appendix B for moderate income housing goals. We've pulled those out just so in case those need more workshopping time, it's not going to slow down the general plan.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
We've also got another Zoom call webinar, I think, with Utah League of Cities and Towns tomorrow. So we'll be getting some more information, but based on the letter that we got, we felt like we addressed it, and it was fairly simple things. Again, we should have been a little more direct in some of our goals and saying we will do this. So
okay, but it doesn't sound like that's anything substantive. It's just
No.
technical stuff that we.
Yes,
Okay.
that's my understanding, and it sounds like this was an issue for 3/4 of the city, so we weren't alone in this at all. So
Okay. Well, I quite like what I read, and I like that you included the data from the survey. I think that helps the city citizens, I hope, see that they were heard and responded to, and that this is reflected in the document. And if that land use chapter works better for you, I'm happy with it. I didn't see anything in there of major concern. And it felt like to me most of the best things in the previous version are still there, especially in terms of community identity. Survey added some meat to. So that's in terms of general comments on those first three. That's all I had. I have a sort of a, maybe it's a little bit of a nitpicky question. There was this section on the arts, and it said something about arts of all kinds. I should know this because I teach humanities, but technically that's is an inclusive enough term, but it sort of ended up sounding like we were only talking about visual arts, especially because you ended up saying something about percent for arts program. I assume we mean music, performing arts, all of the arts, right? I mean, you said that there is a phrase in there, something like arts of all kind, but I don't know if it would be helpful to just sort of expand that. This doesn't require, I don't think, any substantive change, but maybe just like in a parentheses, you could say music, performing arts,
we can definitely
visual art.
That it's funny because that one also kind of struck me a little weird. Not enough to change it, but it I do recall that as well.
Yeah. Okay. And then I like I mean, it's a very brief history. Obviously, it's a 2-paragraph history of Utah Valley, but I'm glad it's in there rather than nothing. So I thought that was fine. You could elaborate on that much more, and it could go in lots of different directions. But it's probably for the purposes of a general plan, keep it simple.
Right.
So I'm okay with that. Anyway, thoughts? Any other feedback? Oh, it looks like the 55-minute discussion that you've allotted for this is not going to happen. Yeah. Okay. In the absence of any further feedback, we will have you move on to the other sections.
Okay.
Need a break? We already had one. Well, we don't need we took our break. So we don't need a break unless you.
If we take a break, we might be able to read these sections that came in at 5:08
Oh, that's
last
not going to
night.
happen in 10 minutes. Yeah. No, well, I would prefer, my personal preference is to continue because, yeah, we're behind and we can always end a little early.
Okay,
But I don't mean to hold you back if you need to. Okay. Go ahead.
I'll proceed. So the next chapter, so we'll go over housing, economic development, and transportation. The end of September, we came with the moderate income housing element. And so you've seen that. That's included in this document as Appendix B. It was interesting. One of the, again, frustrations with the previous document was that you had some of these topics scattered all over the general plan. And it was interesting how much housing information there really was in that previous chapter, but it's really good to, I think, to bring it all together into one spot. So really good, a lot of good data from that previous chapter or previous version, and we brought it together and expanded it. So, and again, survey data was very valuable on this one. We kind of like the last chapter, that it was good to get the citizens' input on what housing types they felt were most needed. And it was good also, we were able, in that survey data, we were able to break it down student versus non-student. And so we heard loudly from the students that they want more student housing, and heard from the non-residents about their desires for different types of housing, like single family housing and townhomes and mixed use development. So one thing that we added to this that I think sometimes gets missed is there's a need for housing with more bedrooms, and not necessarily just single family houses, but there's a development over there was a development that was approved, and I don't know if it's under construction yet, but over in the southeast, over on South State, can't remember the name of the development, but the thing that was really neat about that development, it was going to have like 4 bedrooms rather than your traditional 3. So it had they were larger attached housing units. So we referenced that as a need. This document talks about the fact that we've got a really weird, challenging housing market and housing circumstances that makes providing housing really a challenge. And so if we get creative and start thinking in, it's not typical to see 4 or 5 bedroom attached housing, but maybe that's something we start looking at a little bit more. Might be a little less expensive for a larger family. So just a few things like that we added to it. And we added some discussion about ADUs. Again, this is high level. These are high level policies. We didn't get into anything super specific, but we do highlight the fact that ADUs are one way to bring additional housing units to the city. So there was a lot of data already in the last plan that we brought over about moderate income, about AMI, the market data. One thing that I should note is in preparing this and the moderate income housing element, because of the pandemic and perhaps other reasons, some of the census data from 2020 isn't as reliable as we'd like. And so in some cases, we have used 2019 data just because of its reliability versus the data that we would be able to use past that time. So, when we refer to the AMI, the average, so the AMI, we're using the 2019, I believe, and that one is 83,000. So we still have a lot of good housing data that helps us to know that, okay, based on our AMI in the area, 71% of our households in the city make less than that, make around less than that AMI. So 71% of our households are making 83,000 or less. And so it's really challenging. It tells us that we need more low and moderate income housing. So we still have good discussion about that in our housing chapter. So going on to the economic development, this was one that I felt needed to be, again, like housing, needed to kind of group the information together. And there was probably more that could be addressed on this topic. So we grouped all of the economic development information together and expanded on what was expanded on that topic. One of the things we talk a little bit about, the airport's really been an amazing thing for the city. So much is going on with the new terminal, need for expansion of that new terminal. And so the airport's really bringing a lot of opportunities to the city. So we felt like that really needed to be addressed in this chapter rather. Some of the other economic assets that we talk about are, as you can see up there, workforce. We have a young, educated workforce, and there's 70 or more 1,000 students in the area, and a lot of them graduate. And so we've got a lot of young people who are very talented, and we definitely have that as an asset to us. So one thing that we also wanted to talk about is about some emerging things happening in our city. We over at the River's Edge, the mix at River's Edge, we've got incubator spaces being developed, and then the potential for more near the mouth of the canyon. And so these are spaces for startups. Provo has a great startup culture, and so we want to be able to facilitate more startups in the city. In fact, the citizens told us that they want more we want to facilitate more startups, and so we hear that, and they like what the city's doing to help that startup culture, but they want us to keep doing it. The other thing too is with Rocky Mountain University and the Norda Medical College, and they're in East Bay, and their proximity to other office spaces. We feel like it's we have an emerging biotechnical hub that's going to feed off of those campuses, and so we see we see an emerging biotechnical hub. So we wanted to really hit that home in the document. We wanted to highlight the fact that we've still got some land to develop in the Provo, in the southwest part of the city, and a lot of redevelopment opportunities. We've seen a lot of great things happening on Center and University. There's still a lot of great opportunities just off Center Street to redevelop and improve our city. Gateways, we've got a gateways plan in the works, and staff's starting their efforts on that. And so we want to reference gateways as an important thing that we need to really take a look at. There's some gateways in our city that are good, and others that need some improvements. And so we want to really make sure that it's understood that we want to work on our gateways. So those are some important highlights from the economic development chapter. And transportation, this one was one that I think needed the most balancing. Transportation is an important, a huge thing. This is the state code requires us to have a transportation element, in addition to the fact that we have a transportation master plan. So what this general plan does, one of the important things that it does, and I was going to highlight this with some of the past chapters, is it's kind of the mother document, and it gives us an opportunity to reference so many other documents like the transportation master plan, the parks plan, the modern income housing element, and so forth. So again, we're kind of building off some of those issues, some of those documents here. alternative and active transportation is so important to the city. I sat down not too long ago with Rob Hunter, our traffic engineer for the city, and he again reiterated how important it is that our city cannot handle all of the growth based on, a private automobile. We've got to have alternative and active transportation resources and opportunities for our citizens especially to handle the growth is happening and will come. So I felt that in talking with staff, talking with others, that we need to acknowledge the fact that automobiles are still a necessity. They help businesses. Businesses still need they need cars to come and visit their establishments. They need places to park. So there's still a need for automobiles. We're hoping to get to the point where those become less needed. But the reality is staff feels like there's still a need for them. Again, in highlighting that, we want citizens to make sustainable transportation choices. So we highlight the importance of electric vehicles and getting more electric vehicle, charging stations. And so that's certainly highlighted in our transportation section, as well as reducing single occupant vehicles. Connectivity is an issue that we still feel is important. East to west is getting across the city. East to west is still a challenge for a lot of people, and especially for those who are engaging in active transportation. As a personal note, I remember my mom kind of beat me about that one day. So, she was trying to get across Center Street, and it's or rather across I-15 on through Center Street, and not a great way to do that. So. There's some opportunities for growth and connectivity there. Parking, we had parking goals, but no parking sections. So we added a parking section and point to kind of related to the fact that we still need automobiles. We still need some parking, but in some places of the city, we're overparked. There's a number of places, and I'm sure you can think of a few where we have a sea of parking and we've got underutilized land. So we'd like to see some of that parking put to better use. Perhaps there's some opportunities for, some permit programs and so forth. And so those are highlighted in that parking section. So that's kind of the transportation section in a nutshell. And that's what I have for you today.
Okay, thank you. Questions? I've got a few.
Sure.
If no one else does. Okay. I just wrote down a few. So if you don't mind, I pose them to you. And I apologize. I read through the rest of the general plan rather quickly.
Right.
I was under the impression we were doing 1 through 3.
Right.
So obviously we didn't get the red line version. So I'll look through them more carefully and give you more substantive feedback than I can right now, especially since I think these 3 chapters in particular are pretty important.
Right.
With regard to housing, this is just a kind of an editorial comment that I wonder if the rest of my colleagues would be agreeable to this. But I feel like when we did and I can't remember if it was in the medium income, the median income housing report. Is that what it was called?
Housing element.
Yeah. So I think it's in that report, and you cite the statistic here. It looks like of 41% ownership.
Oh, right.
In the report, it mentions that the rest of the county's higher. I would like us to acknowledge that I don't know if we have the demographic data to say for sure what percentage or what the actual number is of student renters in Provo, but it always feels to me like we look at that and see that we're way off base. And yet when you sort of roughly on the back of a napkin calculate it, we're actually pretty close. If you exempted student rentals from Provo's housing, we come up much closer to the county average for single family homes in the city. I'm not suggesting, and I'm not trying to skew data or anything like that. I just think it would be important in the report to acknowledge that we house, I don't know if we can confidently say what the number is exactly, but if it's something like 30,000 students or 25,000 or 40, I don't know what the number is. We've heard roughly 10,000 UVU students live in Provo, and we know that what the student population is at BYU. Right. Although we don't now know with as much confidence as we used to how many are actually living in Provo. So maybe I'm barking up a tree that has no cat in it. I don't know what kind of analogy I'm trying to make there, but I just want to make sure that we acknowledge in this general plan that we are a college town that has a very large student population that are renters. And I think it's in there. It probably is in there sufficiently. I don't know because I haven't looked at it carefully enough, but that's just one thought. And if my colleagues have strong feelings one way or the other, I welcome them to chime in. Second question about housing that I didn't see this in a quick glance, but I want to be maximally helpful to you and to the council in this general plan when it comes to a land use question or and a housing proposal for a development. Do we have sufficiently strong and clear language in here to help us say to have an evaluation of housing types so that we know what need this housing type is filling, if that makes sense? So oftentimes we hear the developer thinks that we need married student housing, and so that's why they're building married student housing, but we don't really know what our current state of married student housing supply and demand is in the city of Provo. They've presumably done some study, but we haven't. Right. So I'm wondering if we've got enough of a tool here to help the council decide that, because you do have language saying something about prioritizing housing types that are needed, but do we have a tool that actually creates an understanding of that need? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I've always kind of fantasized that we could have some quick, because sometimes we've had debates about, oh, there's already too much high density housing in this area, right? But then we don't really have any clear data to back that up one way or another, and we end up with a lot of anecdotal discussions, and the neighborhood has their anecdotal information, we have our anecdotal information, and we're kind of flying blind. But if we had some sort of rubric that enabled us to determine what this development would do positively and negatively to the balance of housing types in that neighborhood or in the city, that might help us make our decisions a little easier.
Yeah, I think it would too.
I just don't, and maybe I don't know if this is something that should be in the general plan, but it feels like maybe it could be helpful.
I'm wondering, my first thought is that, getting down into the neighborhood level would be absolutely helpful. I think like in the Southwest plan, we have some more tools there. I'm wondering if we could put something in the general plan that would kind of set something up to facilitate or set up the neighborhood plans for the more in-depth information, but we could establish a call for a rubric or kind of lay out a template of some sort. I'm have to develop that more, but I can see where you're going. I'm just wondering if we should make it kind of high level in this document and then develop it more in the neighborhood plans.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to avoid is what ended up happening in the staff reports where you've got that series of questions, but then and you drop in a quote from the general plan. And of course, we all agree we didn't really like that plan a whole lot. So maybe if this plan's better, it's better. But it still felt like, well, we might just be cherry picking language, which justifies the project rather than understanding where the project is fitting within that, in the context of the city as a whole and in that neighborhood in particular. And so maybe some language here that that then translates into how that staff report ends up getting worded differently. So that maybe a line item in that staff report is, does this development add or subtract to the balance of housing types in this neighborhood? Does it help us meet? Because do you see what I'm saying? If
Yeah,
it just says,
I do.
does this help meet a city goals about housing? And then you say, well, yeah, somewhere in our general plan, it says we need higher density housing. So yes, it meets that requirement, but it doesn't necessarily make that the right project for that neighborhood.
Right. Yeah, no, let me look at that one a little bit more.
Okay.
With even with our current planners too, and with Bill and Keith, and see if we can come up with a proposal there that might be helpful,
Okay.
or that would be helpful to.
I think Councilor McKay has a comment about this.
I definitely think getting specific should be left to the neighborhood plans, right?
Right.
Where we get that specific about the neighborhood. But I like your line about, the one line of, does this add to the diversity? And then my other thought was, this comes back down to our constant complaint, right? Is that we don't have a housing audit. And we are waiting for the state to do that, and it's expensive and takes forever, and it's really hard, where we have single family homes, but 4 students live in them. Families don't live in them. Like, we have a lot of different, we have duplexes of their homes. Like, we have so many different, without a door-to-door thing, we can't even properly do.
Right.
I had 2 other things.
Yes.
These are not, these are pretty simple, but in economic development, I wonder, this I think is a minor thing, but I wonder if it wouldn't hurt to mention the recreation. Recreation is mentioned, but then I think it only mentions parks. A major reason the survey indicated that people want to live in Provo is because of the mountains and the valley, the trails. So I don't know if it helped. I think it should be in our economic development that we value tourism. Recreational tourism is an important draw for people to come to Provo, both to live and to just visit. And that we are taking that seriously enough to want to improve our trails and so on.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll work on that.
And then can you remind me again what the safety action plan is?
The safety action plan, I'm not as familiar with it as Public Works, but it's I'm not 100% familiar with it, or I'm not that much familiar with it. What I'm familiar with is the vision 0 goal in there, commitment to work toward eliminating all vehicular deaths. And so
yeah,
I know you have.
Hey, George, the safety action plan is a requirement for the city to apply for grant funds that were part of the federal infrastructure bill. So the safety action plan is required before we apply.
That's what Rob Hunter presented to us.
But it's also being incorporated into the transportation master plan.
All right. Thank you. I was like, I vaguely remember this.
Right.
I'm so maybe I don't know. I can't remember all the specifics in there, but this idea of vision 0 fatalities, I am 100% behind this. And I feel like we ought to be really serious in our commitment to it. And that, but I don't know. Maybe I'll have to look back at the safety action plan, but is this language, and I'll look at this more carefully, but I want to make sure that the level of commitment in here to transportation and pedestrian safety is high enough that we've got some implementation challenges and opportunities ahead of us, rather than just sort of I saw a 50% reduction of pedestrian. I don't know why we wouldn't want to aim for 100, but anyway, I'll look at that more closely, but that was just a question in my mind about what that safety action plan was. I couldn't remember.
Right. That section was actually given to us by Rob Hunter. He actually drafted that. So we did have a good conversation about that, and he felt it was important to add reference to that document. So, but I think you're right that I'm going to look at our goals and see if we've adequately addressed, if we have actionable goals to really, support that vision 0 and that safety action plan.
I mean, if it's called vision zero, but then your goal is 50%, it doesn't seem like your vision is really zero.
Right.
It's like vision 15. We'll take 15 deaths. That's acceptable.
I think they're working towards.
I mean, I know that it's hard to make
Right.
it actual zero. I mean, and I'm not proposing like punitive measures on ourselves when tragedy strikes, but I do think, anyway, I'll look at that more closely and give you more specific feedback than I'm giving here, but
I'll look at the goals on that as well to make sure that we've got some goals that support that plan and that commitment. So.
okay. I've said enough. I don't know if others have questions or comments, but I'm done. Councilor Whipple.
Okay. So in the transportation part, I'm probably going to have what will be substantive comments instead of just stylistic ones. One thing is like on page 3, where we say that in the automobile section, that it remains the most viable and efficient form of transit to move the greatest number of people with their various needs and destinations. There's no way that single family or a single occupancy vehicle is the most efficient way to move people.
That was actually supposed to be eliminated. The
Okay.
efficient wasn't supposed to be in there. I think the point is that when not looking at as a household, but looking at like the city as a whole, that's how you're going to get the most people moving goods and services is by car, but it certainly isn't the most efficient.
Right. With our current infrastructure, using motor vehicles is the most viable form.
Right.
Because of the infrastructure that we've already built in the city.
Right.
That doesn't make it the most efficient. And I appreciate the kind of language about complete streaks and these alternate forms of transportation, and how by building that infrastructure, we can increase the smoothness of the flow for automobiles. I think
Right.
that's an important thing to notice. Another one that's, a similar, I don't know if quibble's the right word, but on the 4th page where we're talking about transportation and the economy, this
Yep.
purple line, maintaining and improving the city's street network with automobiles in mind is currently indispensable for putting the business community in the best position to conduct their operations in the city. There's a pretty good set of data that's showing that increasing walking and that helps our businesses a lot, especially for the downtown area. And downtown, we've had lots of discussions on how we could make this more vibrant. What changes we could make to our current little 15-mile parking lot zone. And I don't know, I worry that this kind of line could make it difficult to do the investment and the changes that we need to Center Street to really help our businesses. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. My thought when I read the transportation section is it's like cars were a swear word in that section. And so I agree with you, but I still think that businesses still need cars to come frequent there. I mean, like I'd love if more people were riding bikes and there was more of that, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And maybe we can, beef up the language about working towards that. But I do feel like it's still the most viable way it's businesses need vehicles to come and support them. So.
Absolutely. And we need to have places for people to park their cars in
Right.
front of the businesses. I know that's a beef that we have in downtown as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the currently indispensable language is something that I'm going to think about. But I wanted to give everybody else a heads up that that's something that's sticking on me. And then I would like in the little parking portion
Yep.
to include bike and scooter parking and things like that in there. Like, I don't think we've got our covered parking at the airport yet. Is that right? Because I'm one of those people who would ride my bike to the airport to catch a plane to go somewhere.
Right.
And I'm not going to leave my bike parked on a rack.
Right.
So that kind of parking infrastructure is something that we need to consider just as much, especially for something like the airport.
Duly noted. That's a good, thank you.
But thank you again.
Councilor McKay.
I agree with Rachel about the parking thing. Adding that was good. I think in a lot of these things, it still talks about walking downtown and the importance of that and how I want to push that. I always think a car is the most efficient for me and my family to get anywhere. And I think most of Provo would agree with that. As far as from their perspective in how to get to something with their 4 kids as fast as they can and drop people off and get what they need to get done.
Right.
So I still think most citizens would agree that it's the most efficient.
So I would just say expedient is different than efficient. So if we're talking about use of resources and things like that,
Is expedient. I actually eliminated the word. It was supposed to read viable and not efficient. That word, that was one of the, it's we've done it's been quite a process. And so you might find 1 or 2 of those in there. So we will definitely get rid of the word efficient out of there.
Anything else?
okay. So going back to chapter 5 on economic development, I just had a quick question, and that is, what is working age?
That's a good
It's on
question.
page 1. I wasn't sure if that starts at 14 or 16 or 18. Is it 16? That's just something I don't know. I was curious.
I don't know that working age.
Oh, I see it in the table. It's got it there. Sorry, I was looking at the body of the text and it didn't have it. Well, 14-year-olds can do some child labor legally here, but even though they're working age, it's a limited field in which they can work. I noticed on the 3rd page that the word diverse was replaced, or the word sustainable was replaced with the word diverse on the human and institutional capital. And I was curious about that decision.
Yeah, I think there was some effort again to balance out the document, and that was one of those words that we did. We didn't eliminate sustainability throughout the document, but we did choose in some instances to try to balance out that language, and I think it also gives a little bit different look. I think there's other ways to describe that same situation, so we chose to try to describe a similar event to it with different words. So, in an attempt to try to, again, try to make this palatable for everybody. So
that is an amazingly difficult task, and I appreciate that. I think I'll stop there, but thank you.
Hey, looks like we've got our homework. So we will get the second half
and
when?
On December 13th.
On the December 13th meeting.
My understanding is that what we were going to do is give you the first half today, take the Planning Commission next week, then December 13th, give you the second half, and then have a public hearing that night to get feedback from the public, and then we'll take this into January for the hope was for adoption in January if we can get everything all of our
the links that we had, right? We accessed them on the website, so
right,
they're available to the public. But has the public been notified? Have we?
Yes, I was asking our office manager about that today, because it's on the because of our planning commission items. So I know that we have to notice those types of items in a few public spaces, and then notices go out to the neighborhood chairs. That's what I'm aware of off the top of my head. So there have been public notices, public notice. I believe there's a public notice website where we're required to post a notice there, in addition to some actual, like you have to put a hard copy or put it in the library or whatever. So we've,
And I'm sure Rachel can help with that. I don't know if you talked with Rachel, but maybe through our neighborhood connections as well, we can get the word out so that solicit that feedback. And
City View automatically generates notices to the neighborhood chairs, so we know that that's occurred. So,
all right. Anything else that you want us to think about in the meantime?
No, I apologize for not getting those red lines to you until last night. We've been working fast and furious trying to get this to you. And so by the time we got them all done, it's 5:00 last night for the red line.
No problem at all. I mean, I know you've been working quite a bit on this, so I'm sure you were under much pressure as possible, and that's an extra help for us. But we'll have time to look at it, and so I'll just encourage everybody to look at it closely and provide any feedback to the staff. If there's something if there's something you feel you want to alert your colleagues to in the process of sending that feedback to the staff, I wouldn't mind knowing about it myself. If I saw what your interactions were with staff were on this, that, or the other, that sort of gives us a heads up of like what Councilor Whipple just did, where she said, just heads up, I'm concerned about this issue. And I think that's helpful. That draws my attention to something that Councilor Shipley's worried about, or Councilor Fillmore, and I'll go to that same section and look at it, and that'll kind of prep me for, and I would say, feel free to chime in right away too. If you already have an opinion on it, you already want to give it a thumbs up, or you want to raise some concerns. I think the more open our communications and frequent our communications are with staff, the easier their job is, and more confident we'll be when we get back to this in the next couple of meetings. So, from your mouth to heaven's ears, let's hope that we can pass this in January. Thank you. Thank you so much, Brandon. Okay. A closed session has not been requested. So if there's no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo Municipal Council meeting by unanimous consent.
Recording stopped.